The frost was still on my windshield when my mother told me I'd embarrassed her in front of the entire club, and then she slapped me hard enough that my earring popped out and skittered across the marble floor of the granite club lobby. Nobody moved. The coat check girl froze with someone's parka half on the hanger. My mother's voice carried the way it always did when she wanted an audience. You couldn't even dress like you belong here. You look like you came to plow the parking lot. I bent down, picked up my earring, and walked out into the January cold without saying a word. The next morning, I called my financial advisor and told him to freeze every account that had my name funding it: the condo, the leased Range Rover, the line of credit at the cottage, all of it. Let them feel the winter. My name is Delia and I'm 31. Before I tell you exactly how I let my family's whole pretend kingdom fall through the ice, do me a favor and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever been the one quietly paying for people who treated you like staff. I'd flown into Pearson that afternoon on the red eye from Vancouver, dead on my feet after 4 days of meetings with a shipping consortium I'd spent 2 years courting. My family thought I worked some forgettable admin job at a freight company near the airport. What I actually did was run the logistics firm I'd built out of a rented desk and a maxed out student line of credit, the one that now moved cargo through every major port from Halifax to Prince Rupert. But it was my mother's birthday, her 59th, and against every instinct I had, I drove straight from the terminal to the Granite Club without going home to change. I was still in the charcoal suit I'd worn through customs. It was a good suit, tailored, the kind I wore to close deals. But it wasn't the sequined, look at me kind of thing my family wore when they wanted strangers to assume they were rich. I had a small box on the passenger seat, a vintage maple leaf brooch in white gold I'd hunted down at an estate dealer in Montreal because my mother had mentioned years ago that her own mother had worn one like it. I thought it might matter to her. I genuinely did. Walking into that ballroom was like walking into a magazine spread about money. Crystal sconces, a string trio playing something forgettable and expensive, tables crowded with bottles of Vuvav that I would have bet my last dollar nobody at this party had actually paid for. My mother stood near the center in a beaded gown, holding court with the wives of 2 city councillors and a woman who owned half the condo towers going up along the lake shore. And there, off to the side, were my younger sister and her husband, both of them looking at me like I'd tracked slush onto a white carpet. Who invited the cleaning lady? My sister said, loud enough to be funny, soft enough to deny later. My brother-in-law laughed into his glass. He was wearing a watch worth more than my first car, a watch I would later learn I had unknowingly paid for. He'd married into our family 8 years ago, all teeth and confidence, a man who described himself at dinner parties as a developer, though as far as I could tell he had never actually built anything. He flipped condos, mostly with other people's money, and lately I'd come to suspect with mine. My mother turned and saw me, and her face did the thing it had done my whole life. A flicker of something, then the door closing behind her eyes. She crossed the room and took my arm, not gently, and steered me toward the hallway by the co-check, away from her audience. "What is this?" she hissed, looking at my suit like it was a stain. "I told everyone my daughter the executive was coming. Not this. You look like you came to read the gas meter." I held out the box. "Happy birthday, Mom." She didn't even look at it. "Are you trying to humiliate me? In front of the Bairds? In front of half the board of the gala committee? Do you want them to think I raised someone who shops at Mark's?" And that's when she slapped me. Open hand, full swing, the sound of it bouncing off the marble. My cheek went hot. My ear rang. The brooch box dropped, and I heard the velvet hinge crack against the floor. "Leave," she said. "Just leave. You've done enough." So I left. I didn't cry in the parking garage. I sat in my cold rental car for a long moment, watching my breath fog the windshield, and I felt something in me go very still and very clear, the way the lake gets in the deepest part of February, frozen solid all the way down. Here's the part nobody at that party knew. For 5 years, I had been the invisible engine underneath my family's entire lifestyle. It started small. My mother's temporary cash flow problem after my father's business folded and he left her with the debts and a taste for a life they could no longer afford. Then it grew the way these things do when you never say no. The mortgage on the house in Oakville that she called the family home, though I was never welcome in it. The lease on her car, my sister's wedding, then her interior consulting business that had no clients. My brother in law's mounting line of credit that I'd quietly guaranteed because my mother cried on the phone and said the family name was at stake. I had set it all up through a holding company so they'd never have to feel the indignity of knowing. I told myself I was being generous. I see now I was just paying for the privilege of being tolerated. That night, I sat in my actual home, a quiet condo in Liberty Village that none of them had ever seen, and I made a list, not an angry list, a precise one. I built a company by knowing exactly where every dollar went, and I applied the same discipline to my own family for the first time in my life. By midnight, I understood that I wasn't just being used, I was being looted. The next morning, I called Aaron, my advisor, the man who'd known about all of this for years and had gently, repeatedly suggested I stop. Freeze it, I told him. All of it. The Oakville mortgage payments, the car leases, the line of credit guarantees, the credit cards under the holding company. Effective today. There was a pause. Delia, if I pull the guarantees, some of these go into default within the week. I know. You understand what that does. I understand exactly what it does. I understand exactly what it does, Aaron. Do it. I hung up and made myself a coffee and watched the city wake up over the rail yards, and for the first time in years, my shoulders came down from around my ears. It took 11 hours. The first call came at 4:40 that afternoon, my sister, screaming so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my face. Her debit card had been declined at the spa where she'd booked the full package, and the front desk had been very polite about it, which was apparently the worst part. The second call came 20 minutes later, my mother, who didn't scream. My mother went cold and surgical, which was always more dangerous. There's been some kind of banking error, she said. Your sister's card, and now mine won't work at the club restaurant. I assume you can sort this out, since you're so important now. I didn't make an error, Mom. Silence. Then, slowly, like she was tasting something rotten, what did you do? I stopped paying for your life. That's all. You told me to leave. I left. She laughed, but it was thin. You don't pay for anything. You drive a rented car. You wore a suit from a discount rack to my birthday. The car's rented because my own is being detailed. The suit is from a tailor on Bloor who has a 2-month wait list. And Mom, the house, the cars, the cards, the club membership you're standing in right now, you've been living inside my checkbook for 5 years. Ask your husband's lovely son-in-law where the mortgage payments come from. Ask him tonight. I hung up before she could answer. What followed over the next few days, I won't pretend I didn't enjoy watching it. My brother-in-law's car, a leased Audi he'd posted on Instagram about 100 times, got repossessed from the driveway of a project site while he was inside pitching investors. My sister, who ran a curated little online life full of number-blessed mornings and rooftop brunches, found that the credit card funding, all of it had simply stopped existing, and her last post, a half-finished story about a getaway to Muskoka, just cut off and never resumed. The Oakville house went into mortgage default within 9 days, and the bank sent the letters my mother had spent her whole life believing happened only to other kinds of people. And still, none of them knew the worst of it yet. Neither did I. It was Aaron who found it. He called me on a Tuesday, and there was a tightness in his voice I'd only heard once before. The time a vendor tried to skim us on a fuel contract. Delia, I need you to come in. Not on the phone. Now. I went. He had documents spread across the boardroom table, his laptop open to the holding company's records, and his face was gray. When I pulled the guarantees, I had to review every instrument tied to the company, he said. Delia, there's a second mortgage on the Oakville house. $320,000 drawn last spring against the equity in the company's name. I never authorized that. I know you didn't. He turned the laptop toward me. Because the resolution authorizing it has your signature on it, and it isn't your signature. I looked at the page for a long time. It was a corporate resolution, the kind that lets a company take on debt, signed and dated and notarized, with my name looped across the bottom in handwriting that was close but wrong. The D2 round, the way it leaned. Someone had practiced. There's more, Aaron said quietly. The funds didn't go to the mortgage, they went out in three wire transfers to a numbered company in Alberta. And that numbered company is registered to your brother in law's cousin. The room went very quiet. I could hear the HVAC humming. What my brother in law had done, what my sister had almost certainly known about, wasn't ingratitude anymore. It wasn't even greed. He had forged the signature of a company director, used it to borrow against a property, lied to a notary, and moved the money out through a shell. That's forgery. That's mortgage fraud. That's, depending on how the lawyers wanted to slice it, 3 or 4 separate criminal offenses, the kind that come with a record and a sentence and a name in the paper. Aaron started talking about calling the police, about the bank's fraud unit, about getting ahead of it. I held up my hand. Not yet, I said. Delia, if we call the RCMP today, he gets arrested at his door quietly, and his lawyer manages the story, and in a year he's back to calling himself a developer at dinner parties. No. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the lake was a flat sheet of pewter under a low sky. He laughed at me in front of 200 people. My sister called me a cleaning lady. My mother put her hand across my face in a building I pay for. They wanted to do this in public, so we'll finish it in public. Build me everything. Every wire, the forged resolution, the notary's name, the cousin's company. Bind it. I want it in my hands inside a week. Aaron looked at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. Here's something I learned that week, sitting with all that paper. Rage is loud, but resolve is quiet. I wasn't shaking anymore. I slept better than I had in years. I went to my company's morning stand-ups and approved a new route through the port of Montreal and signed off on hiring 2 more dispatchers. And in between, I built a case against the people who shared my last name with the same calm I'd use on a freight audit. The opportunity arrived, as these things do, dressed as someone else's vanity. My brother-in-law, it turned out, was scheduled to give a keynote. There was a real estate and development gala downtown, a black tie thing at a hotel ballroom on Front Street, the kind of event where men who flip condos get to feel like men who build cities. He was being given a 15-minute speaking slot, a rising developer to watch, a title he'd almost certainly paid a publicist to arrange. My mother and sister would be there, of course, dressed to the nines, pretending the foreclosure letters weren't sitting on the kitchen counter in Oakville. I bought a table, not a seat. A table, front and center, under one of my company's quieter subsidiary names, so nobody would connect it to me. And I called the one person I trusted to do this right. Her name was Marguerite, and she was the sharpest litigator I had ever met. A woman who'd spent 20 years making powerful men sweat through their shirts in courtrooms. I'd kept her on retainer for 2 years and used her exactly twice. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is rare. And when I finished, she said only, "You understand that once we do this, there is no taking it back. He goes through the system." I understand. Then it would be my genuine pleasure, she said. The night of the gala, I wore a gown. A real one this time, deep emerald, the kind of thing I never bothered with, because I had nothing to prove to anyone whose opinion I respected. But tonight wasn't about respect. Tonight was theater, and I dressed for the part. I had the dossier, bound in black, sitting in Marguerite's bag beside me. We arrived after the salads and before the speeches. I watched my mother spot me from across the room, watched the confusion move across her face, the math she couldn't make work. There I was at the best table in the house, in a gown that cost more than her monthly mortgage, with a woman beside me who radiated the kind of cold authority that money can't fake. My sister came over first, because she never could leave well enough alone. "What are you doing here?" she said, smiling for the cameras. come to apologize. Mom's been very generous considering. Sit down and enjoy your husband's speech, I said. He worked hard on it. The lights dimmed. The MC introduced him with a string of words that meant nothing. Visionary, disruptor, a name you'll be hearing for years. And my brother-in-law walked up to the podium in a tuxedo, flashing that smile, and started talking about his philosophy of building communities, of legacy, of trust. That's when Marguerite stood up. She didn't shout, she didn't have to. She simply rose, walked to the side of the stage where the event director hovered, and said something quiet and showed her something, and the man's face changed. A moment later, two people I hadn't noticed near the back, two officers in plain clothes who had been waiting on Marguerite's call, began moving toward the stage. My brother-in-law saw it happen in real time. I watched it land on his face the way the color drains when a man understands that the floor he's standing on isn't there. He kept talking, but the words came out wrong, his place in the speech lost. He looked out at the crowd, then at the officers, then finally at me, at the front table, where I sat with my hands folded, perfectly calm, looking back at him. I didn't gloat. I just held his eyes and let him understand that I had been there the whole time, paying for every step of the road that had led him to this exact stage. I stood up. The room was already murmuring, phones already coming out. I walked to the foot of the stage, and Marguerite handed me the microphone the MC had abandoned. And I turned to face 200 of the most connected people in the city. Most of you know my brother-in-law as a developer, I said, and my voice didn't shake at all. I'd like to introduce the version of him the banks are about to meet. Last spring, he forged the signature of a company director, my signature, to take out a $320,000 second mortgage on a house he doesn't own, and wired the money to a shell company in Alberta registered to his cousin. That's forgery. That's mortgage fraud. The documents are in this room tonight. I let that sit for a beat. I know all of this because the director he forged is me, and the company he stole from is mine, and for 5 years I have quietly paid for every car, every gown, every bottle of champagne in this family, while being told I was an embarrassment. You could have heard a pin drop, and then you couldn't, because the whole room started talking at once. My mother was on her feet. "Stop this," she said, her voice cracking in a way I'd never heard. "Stop this right now. You're destroying us. You're destroying your own family." "No, Mom," I said, and I turned to look at her properly, and I felt the last thread of something old go slack inside me. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just no longer holding it up. There's a difference, and you're about to learn it." The officers reached the stage. My brother-in-law didn't run. There was nowhere to run. He just stood there, a small, wet-faced man under a spotlight, while a room full of people he'd spent years trying to impress watched him get walked out a side door. My sister was screaming his name. My mother had sat back down hard in her chair, staring at her own hands like they belonged to someone else. I set the microphone gently back on its stand. In the weeks that followed, the case went exactly where Marguerite said it would. My brother-in-law was charged. The numbered company in Alberta unraveled, and with it a whole history of his that even my sister, I think, hadn't fully known. Other people's deposits he'd taken for projects that never broke ground, a trail of small ruins he'd left behind every place he'd ever called himself a developer. My sister filed for separation before the preliminary hearing. The Oakville house was sold by the bank, and my mother moved into a one-bedroom rental in Mississauga, the kind of building she'd spent her whole life looking down on. She called me, eventually, once. She didn't apologize, not really. She told me she'd always done her best, and that family was supposed to forgive, and that she was getting older and the apartment was small and cold in the mornings. She was waiting, I realized, for me to do what I'd always done. Step in, smooth it over, quietly fix the mess and let her keep her dignity. I told her I hoped she'd be warm enough and that I had to go. And then I hung up and I poured myself a glass of wine in the kitchen of the home she'd never bothered to visit. And I looked out at the city I'd built my real life in, lit up and humming under the cold, clear sky. and I felt nothing but quiet. For a long time, I thought love meant being needed, that if I just gave enough, paid enough, made myself useful enough, my family would finally let me belong. It took a slap in a marble lobby to teach me that some people will only ever value the check, never the hand that signs it. Blood does not entitle anyone to your life. Being someone's daughter does not obligate you to fund their lie. You can love people and still refuse to be looted by them, and walking away from a table where you're only ever the one paying is not cruelty. It's the first honest thing you do for yourself. I don't miss the version of me who waited by the phone, who flinched at her mother's tone, who mistook being used for being loved. She paid for everyone. She kept nothing. The woman who took the microphone that night, the one who finally let the bridge burn, because it only ever led back to the cold. She's the one I'd build a life around. And the view from where I'm standing now, the life that's actually mine, has never once made me wish I'd stayed. For years, I thought the price of belonging was just a number I had to keep paying. Every mortgage payment on a house I wasn't welcome in, every car lease, every quiet wire I sent through the holding company, so my mother and sister and her husband would never feel the indignity of asking. I told myself that was love. Looking back, I can see it was a transaction I'd mistaken for a family, and the longer I funded the lie, the harder everyone leaned on it. What happened that night at the Granite Club didn't come out of nowhere. A slap in a marble lobby is just the last domino. It falls because of 100 smaller ones nobody chose to stop. My mother learned over 5 years that contempt cost her nothing and money kept arriving anyway. My brother-in-law learned that confidence and a good watch could stand in for character. And I learned, slowly and then all at once, that the people who only see your checkbook will never see your face. Every choice has a bill attached, and that winter, the bill simply came due for all of us at the same time. If there's anything I'd want my younger self to carry, it's this. Be the kind of person who keeps her word and pays her debts honestly. Because the day my brother-in-law forged my signature was the day he sealed his own ending. He didn't get caught because I was clever. He got caught because a forged name on a real document is a fact that doesn't care how charming you are. Decency isn't soft. It's the one thing that holds up under a court's lights. Use your head before you use your heart's wishful thinking. For years, I let hope do my accounting, and hope is a terrible bookkeeper. The morning I sat down and actually traced where every dollar went, the fog lifted. Seeing a thing clearly, refusing to flatter yourself about what's really happening, that clarity is what let me act instead of just ache, and carry the steadiness to do the hard things slowly. I didn't scream at anyone. I didn't beg my mother to be different. I made one calm phone call, then I waited, then I built the case the way I'd build anything that has to last. The strength that mattered wasn't the slap I could have returned. It was the patience to walk away and let the truth do the work. Marisol asked me once, after it was all over, whether I felt guilty watching my mother move into that small, cold apartment. I told her the honest answer. I felt quiet. Not triumphant, not cruel, just quiet, the way a room gets after you finally turn off a noise you'd stopped noticing. I didn't destroy my family. I only stopped holding up something that was never mine to carry. You can love people and still refuse to be looted by them. And the day you stop paying to be tolerated is the day you find out what your life actually weighs without all of theirs stacked on top of it.